That's what an employee's like. Oh, I'm at this firm. Oh, we're going to be bigger and better. Well, how? Why? When?
Well, Greg, welcome to the You Can't Make This Shit Up podcast.
I'm excited to be here.
We bring in leaders like yourself to talk about success, failure, but ultimately lessons learned in this crazy thing we call life here. And we try to do it through storytelling, but basically through, you can't make this shit up stories. So it's a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us in this incredible studio we have here.
Thank you.
That happens to be yours. So thank you for also allowing us to use your space here. And I'm going to kick it over to my partner Tim here to do a little intro.
Yeah, so Greg Fuhrer is the owner and CEO of Beratung Advisors, one of the premier financial planning organizations in the country. And also an EOS client of mine, and just a great visionary leader. Someone I admire immensely, and I'm just thrilled to have you here on our show with us.
Thank you.
So why don't you start with just kind of giving us a little bit about you and your background and the story of how you got to Beratung.
Yeah, I always like to say that a lot of times people are accidental business owners. I don't think I was an accidental business owner. I think that's what God called me to be, but I didn't know it. So it felt like I was an accidental business owner. I always remember the moment that I was starting my company and I worked at a big bank and I was going to resign to my boss. And I put this piece of paper over and I resigned. He looked at me and goes, I saw this coming. And immediately I'm like, oh my gosh, did he know I've been planning this for 2 years and all the work that I put into this? No, he's like, Greg, I always knew you were going to open your own business.
Yeah.
I just was hoping it was after I retired. And that really stuck with me because I didn't know it. And it's so much so, my wife and I, we were trying to recap the history of our company together so that could be captured for our team. And we were going through it. She's like, from the moment I married Greg, he always said he was going to start his own business. And I was like, that's a little bit of revisionist history. I got the journal notes to prove that you're not right about this. But in her head, she felt that way. And everyone always felt that way. And part of that was I grew up in an entrepreneurial household. So my dad was an entrepreneur, optometrist by trade, but I had many different business ventures, bagel shops, involved in golf courses, a lot of other different things. And just growing up, also, not only did my dad have his own business, but he would use this line that I didn't even realize until recently. It's kind of innate in me. So we always talk about our firm. We say we're a financial planning firm that happens to do investment management when our clients want it and need it. Unlike the majority of my profession that does investment management and happens to do financial planning when clients want it or need it. My dad used to always say, I'm a businessman that happens to be an optometrist, not an optometrist that happens to be a businessman. And so growing up, we would have optometrists from all across the country fly in and spend a couple days with us. Like they would live in our house and mentor with my dad. And it was the weirdest thing ever, but I thought it was normal. Yeah. I just thought that you don't just have strangers come in and shadow your parents. I just thought that was normal. So I did grow up with that background. But I think ultimately why I didn't think I was going to be a business owner, wanted to be a business owner, is because I'm a big person. One of our core values that we have here, our first one's called together. And we used to call it teamwork. We had to change it to together. I've always been a tribal person. I'm always the person that had anything sports-wise, if I liked a team, on me. There's a standing joke of how many times I have my logo on my body, and I mean, we can probably not count all the logo.
Earlier, that
it's in here, it's in here, it's on my belt, my underwear, it's everywhere, right? And so I was just always that way. I love being part of something bigger. And that took me a while to discover what my true motivator was actually impact. I used to think it was success. It's actually impact. And so I wanted to be part of a bigger organization, not run my own organization. So that's a little bit about my journey, my background, how I got here. But there's a lot of lessons I've learned along the way. I like to say, one of my mentors told me, he said, Greg, the difference between a successful person and an unsuccessful person is a successful person just makes more mistakes. I said, well, I'm going to be really successful.
Yeah.
It never gives up. Makes mistakes, but keeps going, right? Grit, I think, is one of the biggest indicators to success. And so that's awesome. So I'd love to hear some of those stories along your journey of that stick out to you that really were transformative in your leadership journey.
Yeah, so I think one of the first lessons that I've learned in my leadership journey, I shouldn't say first, one of the hardest lessons I've learned in my leadership journey is you never are going to get hiring right or perfect. See, I think that a lot of people that don't own a business or those that start a business, they think it's simple to find the right person. If I just find the right person, everything will go into place. And I think it's so simple. And then when they go out and they hire someone, and we genuinely hire slow. One person went to our webpage, saw our interview process as 9 interviews minimum to come to our firm. And they're like, this is ridiculous. I'm like, well, you're not a fit. Like that's the whole point of it. You walk away from that, right? So we truly hire slow, and we really do fire fast, right? We give people notice. We do quarterly reviews. We let people know where they're at, but ultimately we make that decision. The decision's been made. There's no point in keeping somebody on. I got to go sever the head, right? But I think what ends up happening is, in my first hire, so I first started the company, I planned to just be myself. I was 3 months in, and I was over. I couldn't return client calls fast enough. I couldn't get the paperwork done. I needed help. So I got to hire someone. So the first person said, I know a person you should hire. Great. Coffee the next day. It was literally a 15-minute interview. And I thought I was prepared. This is what I did. I called my old assistant and said, hey, you worked with me for years. Can you write the 5 things that annoy you for working with me and the 5 things that are great for working with me? So I was like, here's the 5 things that are annoying to work with me, right? And I thought this was great. This person's like, yes. But I also had one of the 5 things that you should be good at. And 5 things, by the way, the 5 things you should be good at, that person wasn't good at. Guess what? They just needed a job. Great person. Unbelievable culture fit. I stay in touch with her to this day. But absolutely horrible at their job because they were the right person in the wrong seat. And so my wife was like, you're bad at hiring, because I immediately was like, this is not working. So the next hire, this is a true story, because after that, we're a small business. So guess who I hired next? My wife. Shortest tenured employee in Beratung history. And I remember the moment that I fired her. She came down.
She didn't resign.
No. No. And so, you can't make this up. She comes down with a piece of paper, right? I asked her to send a letter to a client. It was all bunched up at the top. I looked at her, I said, do you think this is acceptable to send to a client? Like genuinely, like asking, because maybe we have and she literally looks at me and goes, yeah. And that was the moment I realized she actually genuinely did think it was acceptable. Like she didn't see how bad it looked. I wasn't asking for like some format like in college, like just like a bare minimum standard instead of it being bunched together. And so I say, hey, here's what it should look like. Here's another letter. Can you go back and take it? And she looked at me and said, if you want it that way, do it yourself. And that's when I was like, this is just not working, right? So now I went from having an employee, didn't work out, have another employee, didn't work out. So we're going to hire. And what do you know? My wife was doing all the interviews with me. My daughter at the time was in a baby carrier, right? True small business. And we kept going on these interviews, and my wife said, just hire one. Just hire one. We went through 2 months of interviewing, and she kept saying, just hire the next person. I'm like, that's crazy. Let's put some work into it. And then we end up hiring a rock star employee that's been with us to this day because we took that time. But if I had just let those failures stop me, I would have just kept hiring and hiring and hiring. And I will tell you, I still haven't figured it out. And I don't think anyone will figure it out. No. Because the other part of this is people's lives change. And what's a great employee today is not necessarily a great employee the next day.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I think I won't take credit for this. It was, if anybody knows Jeff Hancher, he said this to me just recently, and I'm like, you nailed it. But it's if you're 100% sure, you're 60% right. So even when you think you've got it figured out on hires, it's almost a coin flip. So we're just trying to, and I'm in the staffing business, and you're just trying to move that number as high as you can, from 60 to 70 to maybe 80, but you're never going to get it right every single time. I think that's a great lesson learned. Even when you think you've got it, you've done probably some interviews of 9 interviews, and it still hasn't worked out. Like you said, for whatever reason, things change. But I think that's a great.
I always ask entrepreneurs, did you marry the first lady you met or the first man you met? And they're all like, no. Then why are you marrying the first employee you meet, right? Like, that there's fundamentally, but I just think it's this lie we tell ourselves. And, I always love it when Nick Saban used to call it that poisonous cheese. It's that poisonous cheese that we give ourselves as entrepreneurs, that I'm not good at this, I can't do this, and then we just back off. Ultimately, you just got to keep going back at it, because nobody will ever figure it out. It's just, it's amazing to me. And along the way, there's always a disconnect. So I told you that first story. I said, she looked at the thing and said, I'm good at these things. She was not. And that's always been an interesting thing. So when we hire, and I actually got feedback from not so great mentors in the past that I'm too abrasive in an interview. I start saying these are non-negotiables. That was one of the worst advice I've ever gotten, right? Like, my goal in an interview is to scare you to not want to come work here. And so a great example of this, culture-wise. So we took our entire team to Deep Creek Lake with their spouses a couple weekends ago. And we were telling our friends, when we were down at Deep Creek Lake with some friends, hey, yeah, we're doing this. And my wife's friend looked at us, that is disgusting. I said, what? I don't want to have to use the restroom that my husband's work friends are using in the same house. That is just gross. What is wrong with you guys as a company? And I said, well, our core value is together. We want to do life together. Why would we not want to do together? Like, I want to hang out with the people I work with on the weekend. We're truly a family. And another person chimes in, is like, I would never work at a culture like that. If my boss wanted me on my family time to go to some lake house, that's worse than a pizza party. And I said, that's the point. I love you both, but I would never want you to work with me. See, it scares people off because you have a culture, something that's so strong and unique. And so you got to do it, because when you're in these interviews, I go there and I try to say, you don't want to work here. Like, here's what it is. And even though I'm crystal clear, people don't get it. So one of the things is, I'm late for everything in life. So guess what? I never start an interview on time. Or I'll move things around and I'll have them walk with me down the hallway, right, to get kind of used to that pace. So one of the other things is we have 3 offices. So a lot of times we'll move our interviews to different offices so they can understand what the commute's like. So as one person lived by our one office, I said, but you have to understand, you're going to work at another office. It's a 20-minute commute. So we had 3 interviews at the other office. They understood the commute. I'm going to do the first quarterly review. Right, we do a 30, 60, 90, 180 day and 1 year, 5 year, and 10-year action plan for our new hires. And we're sitting down and I'm going through the quarterly review. I said, well, tell me, I always like to ask, what's got you excited? What's got you scared? What's got you frustrated? What I need to know, what tools you need to do your job. When we get the frustrated part, she goes, this commute. She goes, I can't do this commute. I bought this brand new car. The gas is too much. I can't make enough money. I need to work in a different office. I said, well, thank you for letting me know that, but that's something I can't fix because we need somebody in this office. So if you're not that person, that's fine. Let me help you find another job, but that's not something I can fix. But I'm sitting there saying to myself, we had detailed conversations in an interview. I made you take the commute, yet they still didn't understand what the commute is. And that's ultimately what I think happens in an interview. It's just like when you're going on a date. Right? And my wife always says the worst date in her life was our first date. Although I just found out her first husband, their first date was actually the second worst, because this weekend we were at a race and every restaurant was full. We started walking to Olive Garden. She goes, I can't go here. I'm like, why? She's like, this Olive Garden here. And here he was my first date with my first husband. And I can't go here.
I love Olive Garden. Yeah.
But I think the idea is that's why it worked, because it was a horrible date.
Right.
I mean, this is how bad it was. I walk in and she says to me, well, first thing I said was, we met on Christian Mingle. It was online, so I had some information. I like to have some information prior, right? And I'm my whole thing, like, why would I waste my time dating if it's not going to work out? So I want to get all this, just like an interview. I want to get the first thing I say, so you've been divorced. Tell me about that. Great way to start off a date, by the way. So later on, she goes, I saw you drove a pickup truck and you're wearing a 3-piece suit. This doesn't add up. And I didn't even think about it because I had set a big goal. And my goal was I could finally get a pickup truck because I always wanted a pickup truck. So I said to her, I go, yeah, I set a goal when I break 6 figures. I can't believe, as it came out of my mouth, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this. But it worked out because we got all the stuff, all the chips on the table. So I think that's really what we try to do with it when we're interviewing people. And the lessons I've learned is don't be that person that's trying to get yourself dolled up on a date. Lay it all out in the lines. And one of our things we do is we do a spouse dinner. And that spouse dinner, we're going to say stuff that might be offensive to you just to see what your reaction is.
At what point do you use your gut?
That's a great question. For me, the way I'm wired, I use my gut 24/7, 365. Part of it is I've probably made up my mind who I want to hire in the first 2 minutes of meeting someone. All the rest of that stuff is to stop me from using my gut. It's to put my team around me and to put people around me to say no.
And I think often people in interviews, as the interviewee, are more focused on winning than necessarily finding that perfect fit, right? And I think that that's why the commute's acceptable during the 3 interviews, but not for the long term, because they're just focused on winning that job versus really thinking, is this the right place that I want to plant myself and grow a career? And so working through that's kind of an interesting challenge.
Another really cool tool is, I think it's Patrick Lencioni wrote a book, the 6 Working Geniuses. I don't know if you've heard that book.
We love it.
Right? So then discernment, right? So if you don't have discernment, or if the interview person doesn't have good discernment, you always want somebody in the room, regardless of their position, right? That can help with that piece of the puzzle too. And that's a little bit of the gut, right? And being able to...
Speaking of working genius, the whole time, all I'm doing is galvanizing.
Yeah.
Everything I just talked about that. Like our team, when they read the book, we went through the test, like it was like, I don't need to see your test results, you're a galvanizer. Like that's what you do, right? Great. I mean, there's not a Luciani book I don't love and don't implement in my life, but that's one of my favorite ones. It's just, but I think the key there is having some type of assessment. So we eat, sleep, live, and die by predictive index. I mean, that's our end all be all. We have all these other assessments we do, and we look at working genius. We look at a lot of other things, but I think one of the key things here is we talk about going with the gut. Every time I interview with somebody, when we were doing this when it was just my wife and I literally at that point in time said, I'm not going to make the decision on who to hire. I'm going to have our predictive index consultant make this decision. The person we've hired that have been successful, every single one, has not been the person I wanted to hire. Because the way I'm wired, I want to hire somebody I like to hang out with.
Yeah.
And so there's a predictive index profile called the promoter that we are not allowed to ever hire. And everyone we've had as a promoter has been fired, not even let go, fired, right? And I'm always told, and every time I interview somebody as a promoter, I'm like, I just want them to work here.
Just send them to me. Send them to me. I need promoters. In the staffing business, it's a great one.
It's a great model. Yeah. But that's why I like it, because they're friendly as salespeople. I love it,
And one of the things that I teach my clients to do in the multiple interviews is to try to focus the first interview on just, are they in the right seat? Like, can they do the job well? Because often people put culture as the first interview. They fall in love with them, and then they are willing to tolerate someone that's probably not really good at the job. And so kind of just the way you think through that, right? To your point, you're never going to be 100% perfect at this, but how do we stack the odds in our favor to be able to have the best possible batting average?
I love what you said there. So our culture meeting, like the one we talk about our culture, is the 5th in the interview process. But I think the idea is to make your culture part of the first interview. So one of the ones we haven't done this, just so you know, but we're literally thinking about doing this, is the first interview, I grab the person and say, hey, we got to go to Giant Eagle and run some errands, and throw them in my truck and drive with me to Giant Eagle and see how they react to that.
Right.
That type of stuff. So we already do some of that stuff. Like I purposely, I'm late, which I don't have to be on purpose. I'm just late for everything in life. But the way that they react out and the way that they interact with the reception, right?
Typical visionary.
What's that?
Typical visionary.
I'm like, thank you. All right, that makes 2 of us. Yeah, I always feel guilty too, but I'm like, it's just
I've tried every leadership hack tool to be on time. I've literally it's one of these things I'm almost obsessive about. Yeah, I'm like, well, how can I actually read an affirmation statement every day. It says, I am on time for all my meetings in life because it is rude and disrespectful to others to be late. And then I'm late.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why I'm late is and I'm not trying to justify it, but it's just the reality and why I get away with it. By the way, people are like, would you be late for your largest client? Yes, I've never been on time for my largest client. I can tell you that. They will tell you that. All my clients joke around about it, right? And it's not just clients, it's everyone. I'm late for the reason why is the person in front of me is truly the most important person in the world. I'm all in. I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not looking at whatever. And so what ends up happening is when I'm engaged in you, all of a sudden the time slips away. I'm in a time machine, and what was supposed to be a 45-minute meeting ends up being an hour and a half meeting. But both parties walk away saying, oh man, that wasn't an extensive meeting. It was what needed to happen. And I think that when you're present in front of somebody, that's what they're really looking for. Because there's a lot of people that are on time, and the reason why they're on time is because they're not really present, because they're looking at their watch, they're looking, when do I have to go to the next meeting, and they're so worried about being on time that they never are truly present.
I think there is a balance, though, right? Because you started off like, even in your affirmation, right? Because there is somebody on the other end that's sacrificing their time, right, to be there, and I'm not there, I'm not showing up, and it's like, I think there's hacks, right, that we need to, at least I need to figure out or continue to try to work on to make sure that, yes, it's important to add that additional time on the front end with whoever you're with, but also not,
and the other part of this is
at the cost of someone else, right? So we have to figure out how to do that.
And I also can't get mad at anyone because this is the worst. It's a toxic trait to be late, but there's another toxic trait that I can't tolerate is when you're late and then expect everyone else to be on time. Mm-hmm. I don't ever fault somebody or get mad or act like my time's too valuable, because the other part of it is I always got something to do. I have my Remarkable in my hand, I'll just read the Bible. Right? If I show up to something and you're not there, I got a list that never stops of things I want to do. So I don't understand why people are just worried about being late. Like if I have to wait at a doctor's office, I'm gonna have something to do. I don't understand what it's like. People are so worried about. I'm like, what's going on with your time? And it's sometimes
it's kind of nice when you have that extra. It's like, oh, I got a little extra.
It's
30 minutes of wait time here. Now I can dive in.
People are always like, you should charge clients when they rearrange an appointment. I'm like, no, because then what do I do when I have to rearrange their appointment, right? So there's a quid pro quo. But honestly, a lot of times when a client reschedules their meeting, I'm like, ooh, found time.
Exactly.
Found time.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit about trying to initially get the right person in the right seat. What are some stories throughout your career where those you can't make those shit up stories that really highlighted, yep, we have the wrong person or in the wrong seat, we need to make a move?
So would you say you can't make this shit up? I just got to tell you this story. This comes from back, I worked my way through college at Eaton Park, all right? I worked the midnight shift at Eaton Park. And one of the things I always say, I tell my wife all the time, like, I believe everyone should work in the restaurant industry. There's just so many lessons you learn from it. It was valuable. My wife always says, you would still work at Eaton Park if you could attain the other things you want in life. I'm like, I love it. I actually joke around with my buddy, I'm like, we should just get a weekend job at Eaton Park for like 1 week in a month. And the only thing that stops me from is that what's going to happen is they're going to guilt trip me into working more days, right? Like, I genuinely loved it. But there was this guy, his name was Pete, right? And there's this, like when we were back there cooking, and I did everything when you're a manager at Eaton Park, you genuinely like an entrepreneur. Like you wear every hat, right? You're the head cleaner, you're the head chef, you're the head everything, right? So I hop back into the kitchen. It's a busy time period. And there's the line cook is cooking everything on would look like a Blackstone, like a flat, And then there's a person prepping everything and putting it up in the window. And there's what's called this middle cook. And the middle cook has some very specific things they make, like salads. And this guy, Pete, puts a big giant bowl in the window. And this bowl is what you would put like a giant pasta dish or a giant salad dish. And there was 1 scoop of mashed potatoes and 2 slices of bacon. I remember this for the rest of my life. And my buddy Jordan looks at him and goes, Pete, what the hell is that? He looks at him dead straight in the face. He goes, it's a hot roast beef sandwich. And he's like, all right, funny, Pete. Like, I don't have time for this. What is that? And he's like, it's a hot roast beef sandwich. Here, the area of town we were in, there was a little bit of a heroin problem.
Oh, God.
And I learned at a young age when I was doing this to know the telltale signs of when employees are on heroin. He was high on heroin. And so we had to send Pete home for the day. And the reason why I always say it's like, you can't make this shit up. That like, there was so much stuff I learned there. Like the one cook who I found out that big giant water bottle she was drinking all day was straight Nikolai vodka. But one of the best cooks ever was there, functioning alcoholic, right? Yeah. 6 a.m., all those different things. But the reason why I like to tell that story is I use that with our team all the time. Because there's so many things, just like I told that story of like the person doing what the commute is, that in their head, it is a hot roast beef sandwich. And I think that's what like all these stories ultimately are. It's really hard as a visionary, and you know the vision where you want your company to go, to understand that everyone can't see that vision. And I'm not talking like you haven't done a good enough job of like they just genuinely can't see it, because to them that is a hot roast beef sandwich. To my wife that had this typed up thing, that was an acceptable client letter that if she had got from a financial planner, she wouldn't think anything of it, right? So I think that all these stories really come down to is what a person sees is different than what you see.
That's awesome. I love that. And when I think of like all the people I know, you stand out as a vision caster, right? You have done such an amazing job here at your office. Your 10-year plan is laid out year for year and video screens. I mean, you do so much to try to cast that vision. And so talk to us a little bit about that. And because you're very purposeful and thoughtful in trying to get people to see, something besides that sandwich.
Yeah. So I always say, the way I like to say it is, if I told you guys right now, hey, after this podcast, let's all hop in my car. I want to show you something really awesome. What level would you stop that car ride? That's what I mean by that. We all hop in the car and let's pretend like I'm good enough, galvanizing, motivating you enough to be like, oh, this is something really cool. Like guys, you got to see this. Like you're going to, this is unbelievable. So we all hop in my truck. Probably about half hour is where you'd be like, well, how far away is this? Well, what if I was driving, we're in Pittsburgh. What if I was driving to Florida? How could I get you to stay in that van? At a certain point in time, I got to tell you where we're going. And I got to tell you how long it's going to be to get there. That's the misery that most employees are in. They're in a van. And I just think of like every year we used to go to Florida as a family and drive down to Orlando. This is back when a timeshare was a timeshare. And it was the day after Christmas. And we all pack in this van, right? I mean, just horrible. Talk about you can't make this shit up. The one time, my brother's got in a fight over abortion, right?
Oh, wow.
Abortion, politics.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Which reminds me of last night, I feel like.
and so they're literally fighting, and we're at a stoplight in the van. They're fist fighting back and forth in the van, and the van's like shaking. And people are pulling up just watching, like in the cars next to us, like, what is going on, right? So these trips were horrible. And so when I go on a trip, I always tell my wife, we'll take as many bathroom breaks as anyone needs. Like, you can be like, I need a bathroom, like, next exit. Because my dad would try to get down to Florida at, like, 2 or 3 bathroom breaks. And I still say this day, like, I pee more than any person I know. I think my dad screwed up my bladder. Like, I can't hold stuff in my bladder because I held it too long, So, but that's like, think about these, like, trips. Like, that's what employees like, oh, I'm at this firm. Oh, we're going to be bigger and better. Well, how? Why? When? And so the other thing is, if I told you guys we're on this van, right? We're going down to Orlando. If I just said, well, hey guys, the thing is we're going to Orlando. We're actually going down here to Disney World. Let's just pretend, no thing if you're adult Disney people, but you can't motivate me. I know that part.
Only cruises. Disney World itself, no. Cruises.
That was a little plug, right? But you can't motivate me to go to Disney, right? Like, I know the wine festival is supposed to be amazing, right? I'm just not excited to go there, right? I'm excited to take my daughter there at some point in time, right? But like, if I just said one time, you might get excited, but like another 3 hours in, you need a reminder of that, right? You need to keep motivated, get excited. Like, it's that kid, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Like, oh no, we're at south of the border, right? If you guys ever been to south of the border, great tourist trap, love it. But I mean, you need to motivate, inspire constantly, and constantly remind them, like, hey, we're going to Disney World. When we get there, which ride do you guys want to ride? Hey, did you guys know that there's actually multiple parks? Like, let's get excited. Hey, guys, I got the Fast Pass or whatever it's called. Well, and you got to constantly get them excited. And now all of a sudden the time starts to flip by. And now all of a sudden when we got to stop and get gas, you're like, you know what? I'm going to go run in and grab us snacks. I'm going to go do this because I want to get us down there faster. And everyone gets on board. So what a lot of visionaries do is they say we're going to Orlando. All right. But they only say it once, maybe twice. No, it's got to be a constant. And let's pick the playlist. Let's put a playlist together. That's our Florida playlist, right? Now, full disclosure, when we went down there, it was Zig Ziglar the whole way down, right? Little Stephen Covey, but mainly Zig Ziglar the whole way down. I always say, like, sometimes in my sleep, I hear Zig Ziglar's voice, right? John Maxwell, Zig Ziglar, and Stephen Covey were like honorary parents in our household. You know, we were never in my dad's vehicle, not listening to that. And by the way, my daughter's way home from her being birthed, right, from the hospital, she was listening to books, you know, and so I've carried on that trait. But I think that's what you need to do with the vision. So it's got to be how you live every aspect of your life. And one of the things is I look at my VTO, my Vision Tracker Organizer tool, and EOS every single morning. Like, I have to stay on track that vision. And what it does is when you start doing that intrinsically, it becomes extrinsic.
Yeah.
It just exudes from you.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question, because I'm also a big fan of EOS, and I know what my life was like before EOS. I say this and after, and I'm curious, when did you start using EOS?
Yeah.
And before that, were you on this trip to Florida and not doing these things that you're talking about now? Was that part of your learning process, or what was the aha moment with?
We're in 2024, and this is going to, for those of you who are familiar with EOS, math is not going to work out. I've been familiar with EOS for 40 years. My dad ran his companies on EOS. See, Gino Wickman didn't create EOS. Gino Wickman discovered EOS. Mm-hmm. He realized what made his father successful and what made the business successful, and he put him in an easy package for us entrepreneurs to have that. Those guys that were coming to the house to learn how my dad was running his business were learning EOS. So I remember distinctively reading Traction the year it came out, by the way. And I just remember reading its aha moment. At my dad's funeral, they buried him with a yellow tablet that had scorecard numbers on it. He didn't call them scorecard. They tell us this story. I mean, I can't make this shit up. He calls into his office. There's these 3 daily numbers. We have a fax machine in our house. Every day, 5 p.m., these numbers were faxed in. And he wanted to see those numbers. So my dad was at a point in time where he was truly living the EOS life, and he had a self-writing business. He would just take off on these trips and not tell anyone because he could get a good deal. So he calls his staff. He's like, hey, it's Dr. Fuhrer. I'm in Cairo. Cairo, Egypt? Yeah, yesterday there was this really good deal, and I forgot to tell you guys that. But anyways, what's the numbers for today? He's literally on the other side of the road, and he needs to know the numbers. And by the way, he taught me this stuff, and he was really, really, he's like, Greg, these numbers tell me what's going to happen 3 months from now. That's what he knew. And the one number is called recall. It was a patient that had to come in for their eye exam in over a year. And so they were calling every day to get recalls. So if you got that person in, now he knows he's going to get revenue from that person buying glasses, contact lenses, and everything. He ran his business like that. He was constantly cash and vision. He constantly had it on a notepad. It was his version of a VTO. He could show it to you. So I've been running it my whole life. I started, once I read the book, of choosing the true EOS tools. I self-implemented EOS before I even started this company. I used it as one of my tools to start this company. However, I didn't really learn EOS. And it's the same thing with financial planning. Financial planning is easy. Anyone can do it. The problem is you can't do it yourself. You need somebody. I don't want to talk to my wife about money. Nobody does. I need a third party in the room. It is really, really hard to self-implement EOS. You have to be one of those people that have all the skill sets. Gino Wickman always says that there are some people that are visionaries and integrators. They're just rare. right? I've never met one. I mean, I'm sure they exist, right? So there are people that can self-implement, but I've yet to be an entrepreneur that's been successful self-implementing. So when my life changed was the day Tim Tannert came into my life. And I will tell you, I was visiting a mentor, and they grew a firm. He's one of my biggest mentors in my life. And they went from $2 million to $20 million in revenue in about 7 years. And I said, if you could boil your success down to one thing, it's tip of the iceberg, right? We know that all this stuff, he's like, but there's one thing you do. And he was like, oh, you have to think about that. It was hiring an EOS. I'm like, what? He's like, I know you guys are self-implementing. You know, hire an implementer. And we literally were on the trip back from Indiana from this mentor's office, and we're getting an appointment set up with Tim, right? And so I think that that's where it changes your life. What does it do? It does one thing, in my opinion. See, as a visionary, we see things crystal clear. This building we're in the studio, I saw this the moment I walked off this elevator. It was all cement. There, in my faith tradition, there's this letter to the Corinthians, and the guy that writes it, Paul, talks about there's functions of the body. The eye can see, the ears can hear, but the ears can't see. And so as a visionary, God has placed in my DNA to be able to see things, but it's not clear to others. It's definitely not clear to my wife a lot of times, right? And what it does is it gives clarity in every sense of the organization. I'll have entrepreneurs all the time like, the VTO is just too simple. That's the point. That's the point. If you want something more complex, you want to look at, but it has to be crystal clear. And that's what the EOS does. It provides clarity that as a visionary, you can't find elsewhere. And it's not about clarity for you. It's about clarity for your team. How does it get clarity? It gets clarity through accountability.
That's it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So what I'm curious now, because so what changed once Tim came on board? So to kind of walk us through that before and after.
The right people and the right seats. Because once you get clarity, see, I've cast this vision, but it wasn't clear. So we have this vision, it's called the 412, 4,000 lives impacted by a financial plan, 10 million in revenue, 20 CFP professionals, right? And we talk about what is this? What's the result of it is to have an impact so great that our community would weep if we close our doors, where every team member is fully known, fully loved, and fully challenged. Great. You heard it. You know what it is.
Yeah.
What's your role in it?
Yeah.
And this, my wife actually works for the firm again, by the way, but she's a rehire.
Wow.
It's kind of a long story. That's a whole other thing, right? We were hired for a position, but it's an EOS story because the only reason why she came is because we had her 5 roles laid out for this job. And I was asking for advice, and she goes, I think I'd like that job. I was like, what? All right, so we had to go through that whole thing, and we went through some mentors to make sure it was the right thing. But even when she was here, she knows his vision. Yeah. She's probably heard the vision more than any person. I mean, Tim, you've heard it a lot, but she's heard his vision so many times. She wasn't clear on what her role towards his vision. How do I connect the dots? A book that I always read tons of books. We have a thing here called the Beratung Canon.
I saw it. Yeah, it's phenomenal.
And that's like version 1.0. Wait to version 2.0. I got a lot of books I want to reread on there. So I like a kind of an encyclopedic knowledge of books. And like, you can tell me what you're going through. And I'm like, so I was mentoring a new entrepreneur the other day. I was like, okay, here's the 10 books I want you in order, because Entrepreneurial Leap first, Traction second, right? I was going down this list. And I'm like, 3 signs of a miserable job. Because see, I think what ends up happening is we don't give that accountability. What ends up happening is people are good performers at their job. They're the right people, or they're in the right seat. But we don't really get that clear. I always do right people, right seat, right? Stephen Covey grew up with that stuff. But how do you make it happen? See, we talk about that job interview. The part is you got to help people realize themselves they're not the right fit. That's what it does. And so what changed at our company is we had people that were here because they loved financial planning. They didn't love our vision. They didn't love our culture. And now you're starting to have this conversation of, you need to go, but they don't want to go. All of a sudden, when you put EOS in place and everyone has to constantly see and it's very clear, people self-select out. Mm-hmm. It builds unbelievable culture. We've always been a culture-based firm. But when we fully implemented EOS, it put it in writing and it was in your face and you were held accountable for it. and it changed everything. It got our team to not hear the vision, not understand the vision, not memorize the vision. It got our team to internalize the vision. Everyone knows where we're going, why we're going it, and most importantly, what they could do to help us.
We're going to
Are
Disney World.
they the person to get the gas? Are they the person going to get the chips? Are they the person that's going to make sure the radio's going on? Because we know we're going to Orlando.
Yeah.
But now I understand through accountability and clarity what my role is in that.
I've never asked you this question, and I was thinking about it this week, and I think this would probably be to both of you, but you mentioned your wife. Is it possible to run EOS in your family?
Absolutely. And
I don't know if you've talked about that.
I have the
before,
personal
but-
VTO.
yeah, Gino created a VTO that is designed for families.
You're doing like your weekly L10s? I mean, you call
Yes.
it...
Yes.
Yep, absolutely. It's unbelievably powerful because, to your point, right, getting the entire family to know, okay, we're going to Disney World. This is what we need to do together, right? This is why all of these different pieces, parts as a family have to come together to
You do
highly
it?
function. We do a large part of it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So,
Do you?
Core
This
values.
is- this
all-
is
the
like-
whole 9 yards.
We probably need 3 hours to cover this.
Yeah, yeah.
This is actually,
Looking at the time.
I'm actually like, this is probably one of the things I'm most passionate about in life.
Okay.
See, to run EOS, you have to have the visionary integrator on board. Right now, we have a visionary on board in our personal life and a reluctant integrator. My wife thinks it's the dumbest thing ever. She doesn't want to do it, but it's getting to the point of like where, I don't want to say I'm wearing her down, but I'm wearing her down, that she's getting it. So we're kind of half running it. But I think, like, here's the thing I always say. I've always run, so one of the most transformational books in my life, well, the most transformational book of my life, by the way, was this year, EOS Life Rocked My World. Changed my whole perspective and everything I'm doing in life. If you're an entrepreneur and you have not read EOS Life, like, stop everything you're doing and read it today. It is the most transformational book I've ever read. But one of the most transformational books, and we call it our Gospels here in our canon, that's the 4 books you're required to read, is a book by Napoleon Hill, right? Think and Grow Rich. And he talks about the concept of mastermind. He talks about this board of directors, and Abraham Lincoln gets a personality. I've been doing that like my whole life. Mm-hmm. And I have like, okay, you're my finance committee of Greg Fear Incorporated. You're this, right? So when we got married, I've always kind of looked at that perspective. We spend so much time. So if I were to know an entrepreneur and I say, what's the most important thing to you? You know what they always say? My family. Show me your wallet and show me your calendar, and I'll show you your priorities. You're full of shit. And you need to be called out on that. And that's pointing the finger right back at me, right? By the way, my 3 roles in life are leader first, husband second, father third. Because I don't get fulfillment from being a leader, then I am not a good husband. I literally might as well not even show up as a husband. I have to get that first. And if I'm not getting fulfilled as a husband, I'm a horrible father. And so I'm very clear on my priorities. And so when I say to these entrepreneurs, you put all this time, you hire an EOS implementer, you have strategic meetings and do all this stuff. By the way, if you're doing personal EOS, you should have quarterly retreats, right? 100%. And so I'm trying to actually just have this conversation yesterday. I'm like, hey, I'm going to strategic coach in Toronto on these dates. I want us to do our quarterly EOS and be. She's like, yeah, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that the other day, why are we not doing our personal lives that way? Why are we so intentional with our businesses, yet we leave our personal lives to the wind?
Yeah.
And so if it's not EOS that you're doing in your personal life, you need some type of system where you're meeting weekly, covering issues you have as a family, put them in writing. You need clarity. How many
Roles and
times?
responsibilities, all of those things, right? Like,
Yeah, clarity. How many times? I actually, so in our financial planning process, our proven process, okay, our second meeting is called clarity meeting, right? And so I always say, just because you told me stuff, just because you said this about your life, I might not have understood it perfectly. So my goal is to regurgitate it back to you to make sure we clearly understand your goals. And I tell everyone this. My wife will tell you, just because I heard something doesn't mean I fully understood it. And she would tell you the same thing about me. There are times where she speaks British English and I speak American English. You know, she's out there calling it a lift and I'm out there calling it an elevator. We're saying the same thing, but we're just not connecting. because that's human nature. So if you want to have clarity in your life, if it's not following EOS your personal life, you've got to have some system. But if I'm already doing EOS in my business life, I know the common language, I know the structure of it, and there's some tweaks, by the way, right? So you tweak some things around. So when you go down there, one of the big things is like it's like a bucket list, right? You put a bucket list in there. So we're actually, and part of why I'm so excited about this, we're actually working with our team to have everyone on our team start to run their personal lives with EOS. I just think it's clarity. When you have clarity, you get to where you want. Yeah. So our mission statement, when our mission statement talks about pursuing your goals to live a fulfilling life. I just, like, moment of clarity, do my clients define what is a fulfilling life? Mm. You know, one of the questions I love people always ask is, can you define success? And like these business leaders, all these podcasts, they can't define what success is. That's a problem. What does fulfilling life mean to you? Well, if you don't have a vision tracker organizer tool, how do you try to start with the end in mind, right? Stephen Covey. Mm-hmm. If you write your obituary, if you do like a 25-year plan like Dan Sullivan talks about doing, how do you pull that back? It's the same fundamental principles. We do 10-year, then we go to 3-year, then we go to 1 year. It's just, it makes life perfect.
For you and me, I think that's like, it fits, right? But I think there are a lot of people, and I've had conversations with other leaders just recently on the same topic. And a lot of them will say, yeah, until I go to my wife or my spouse, and they're like, you're out of your freaking mind. We're not doing this, right? So maybe you can even do it on your own, but then, like you said, I have to wear them down a little bit, but at least it's in there, and you can start to add some clarity to it.
Exactly. Or start simple, right? And that's where, when I said, I do some of these things because my wife's the same way, right? We're just wired differently. Mm-hmm. And I think that for most people, right, opposites attract, and she has gifts that I don't, and we're a good fit because of that. But, start with the 10-year target. If we could only accomplish one thing together in our marriage and our family over the next 10 years, what would that be?
You know what?
And just get aligned on that.
Do you know what? Probably, I don't know, I'll make up a number. Probably 90% or more, if you did that, husband and wife, they would be in 2 different countries. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No one's talking
about
what
I do for a living. It's unbelievable.
I think we're going to be in 5 years and 10 years. And a friend of mine said they did it, and they literally were not in the same book, not in the same country. They had 2 completely different visions on what their lives were going to look like.
We were in 2 different states. We were at least in the United States, but I was thinking Florida. She was thinking more temperate, like North Carolina, right?
And how easy would that be to just get that down and
absolutely,
out, right?
So and what's that look like?
How I did this, by the way, to get my wife more fully on board. We were coming back from Florida on a plane. Right, we're up in the air, no Wi-Fi or whatever, or maybe the Wi-Fi, but it's not good, and we're not paying for it. And so she didn't know what I was doing. I had prepared the VTO. I had these list of questions that I had done. And so I've literally talked, I was like, so tell me, what do you visualize us being? And my wife's very hard for her, she's very real, right? Like very now, very present. I'm very future. Like I don't get any energy about tomorrow. Like I need to be like 30 years out. It's Tom Wire. And so like we're having this whole thing. We're singing. She got to like the second part of it. She sees me pull out my Remarkable. Like I'm trying to be all sly. I'm trying to write. She goes, "You're writing notes, aren't you?" I was like, "It's just a thought that came to me." She goes, "Let me see your notepad." I'm like, "It's just a random thought." She goes, "You're trying to get me to do EOS, aren't you?" I was like, listen, we're already at this point. Like, let's just continue on.
Here's the next one.
We're halfway done.
So it works. By the way, there's, believe it or not, there's a book about this. One of Lucioni's, one of my favorite. 3 questions for a frantic family.
I love that one. Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's how do you get that busy person? So those 3 questions. I tried to get my
wife to read that, and I couldn't get her all the way through.
Have you downloaded the tool for it?
Yeah.
It looks oddly similar to a
VTO.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's VTO Lite. And that's so Tim knows this. I reached out to us like 2 years ago. I was like, how do you do this in your personal life? Like, give me the resources. And I just read that book. I was like, that book dawned on me. I'm like, wait, I don't need this system because now I'm operating on 2 systems. Mm-hmm. I at one point in time I had an iPad for my job, and I had to have an iPad because there was an app that was only available on iPad. But I was using a Samsung, and I loved it. Okay. Especially at the time, because Samsung, I could have extra batteries. I had like 10 batteries in my office, 10 batteries in my car, right? I could replace the battery. I felt like somebody in the middle of the Cold War switching sides when I switched to Apple, right? Not to mention I hate Apple. I think it's an evil empire, and I don't like Apple products. You know, I use all Apple products.
Just the logo alone, right?
It's
bite out of the apple. I mean, it takes us all the way back.
But I do love Steve Jobs, the leader and stuff. There's stuff, I don't like Apple stuff, right? And so I was using Samsung. I had to switch to Apple because my brain couldn't handle my phone having one operating system and at work have another operating system. And so our chief branding officer in our studio we're in was trying to convince me that we need Apple computers to run the equipment here because their whole team's on Apple. I'm like, I get that, but our team's all on Windows. And so like, I can't like rewire my brain for two different operating systems. So our stuff's here in Windows, and apparently it's limited for studio stuff. I don't know. Don't care, because I can't do two operating systems. So it's just like, to me, if you're that visionary, why not bring it home? And I think once your spouse gets on board with it, because I'm blessed to have a spouse that's part of the firm and she gets to see what EOS is. But most of them, their only exposure is maybe you gave them the book, What the Heck is EOS? They don't understand it. Just like that person that didn't understand the commute, they don't fully understand what it's like to live that. And what ends up happening is, I think they have a greater appreciation for what you're doing if you're the visionary, if you're running your personal life on EOS.
That's awesome. Well, Greg, you have provided tremendous nuggets throughout this conversation. And so the last question we want to ask is, if you were going to go back in time and provide yourself advice, the one thing that you wish you knew years ago, what would that be?
See, I struggle with this one. And the reason why I struggle with this one is I'm a big believer there's wins and lessons, not wins and losses. I don't know I'd want to change anything. Yeah, I always talk about regrets. One of my few regrets is I was supposed to join the Marines, and my parents talked me out of it. I kind of regret that. But I also think, when looking back at the time, and like, God's plan is so much better than our plan. So I don't have a lot of regrets. So I've really struggled because I tried drawing through this, like, what would I go back and change? And it's like, well, if I change this, the butterfly effect, the ripple effects. So it's always really hard for me to say, what's my advice to 25-year-old Greg? It's more, what's the advice I give for mentoring and developing? But I've journaled through this. I've come with one thing. Things will change in your life. And what I mean by that, your priorities will change. So you talk about where you want to be in 10 years. When I was young, all I wanted to be was a Pennsylvania state senator. I fell in love with the green marble when I was in like 5th grade, 3rd grade. My whole life was around being a Pennsylvania state senator. And everything I did up until that point in my life was around that. I was actually the youngest elected official in Pennsylvania at one point. Loved it. I hate politics and don't get involved in politics anymore, right? Outside the lobby for my profession. So everything I did in my life was based around something that was going to change. It's the change of money, right? So you might value when you're younger, maybe going on trips with your friends. And then when you have a wife and children, maybe you wish you had that money to do those trips with them. And so what I think is just know that and get really comfortable with, you have to have 25-year goals. You have to have an obituary written, but that obituary and what matters will change over time. And I wish somebody would have pounded that into my head. Because when I ultimately had to go through changes, it was really hard, because as a visionary, if I'm not going to go to where I want to go, that's failure.